everybody, this is Elizabeth Off Grid. So there's a question that I personally wanted the answer to, and I found the answer and I want to share it with you all. And this is, why is there no BLM land in Texas? Why is it so hard to find dispersed camping places in Texas? Now, there actually is a tiny bit of BLM land, but generally speaking, Texas is this huge state, the second largest state in the United States. It's got tons of kind of open space, especially in East Texas, but very little places, very few places to disperse camp. Why is that? Unlike, Nevada, which is like 85% owned by the government, and like 80% of that is BLM land, or New Mexico. I mean, a lot of these states out there is a huge percentage of it is public land, not Texas. So why is that? So first, let's make sure we're all on the same page so you actually know what I'm talking about. Dispersed camping means there's all kinds of places, especially in the western part of the United States, where there's just big, wide open areas of land that is owned by the federal government primarily. And in those places, sometimes there's formal campgrounds, but a lot of it's so spread out and not used that much that they're okay with you just kind of camping almost anywhere, dispersed, spread out. And in those places, you can camp for typically it's like 14 days, but I've seen everything from 7 days all the way up to 30 days on these BLM land or national forest land government pieces of land, which is awesome. And it's free. Now, some people have kind of messed it up for all of us because they left trash and poop everywhere. And so now they're making you get a permit, and now they're shutting places down where you can't do it. And now they're making things be formal campgrounds. But generally speaking, it's a really great resource for all of us who live in a vehicle permanently or who are traveling in a vehicle RV van. Now, BLM, it also means Black Lives Matter, but here it means the Bureau of Land Management. So the United States federal government has a lot of different, owns all this land in the United States directly. And it has a lot of different agencies that govern those pieces of land. The National Park Service governs national parks. BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, is governing a lot of kind of more deserty, remote kind of areas. The National Forest Service is governing national forests. And I think they also run the grasslands. National monuments can be actually run by any of those, not just the National Park Service. And they all have their own rules, okay? But typically, the most dispersed campsite kind of places are going to be under the BLM or the National Forest. But there's not that much of that in Texas. Why is that? Well, don't forget, Texas was a country. It was a republic, the Republic of Texas. And so when Texas joined the United States, it did it under kind of a different set of rules than most of the other states when they joined the United States. Now, Texas has had some war problems before that. So they had millions of dollars in war debt. But they also, at that time, the state of Texas owned a whole bunch of land. So they kind of made a deal with the United States. And part of it was a bunch of the land that was parts of what's now New Mexico and some of Colorado and some of Oklahoma. They made a deal with the United States that some of that was going to go to the United States in return for debt payoff, I think. And then they became a state. And then Texas viewed the rest of the land that they own, which was a ton of land, as being a resource, not for natural resources, but for revenue for the government. So what they did throughout the rest of that time up until 1900 is they sold it off to generate money. They sold it off to build buildings. They sold it off to generate revenue for Texas's regular spending. They sold it off to pay for schools, all this kind of stuff. And so 95% of the land in Texas is owned privately. It is not owned by a state or the federal government, which is wildly different than Western states. So in Texas, about 5% of the land in Texas is a public land owned by the state or the federal government. Now, that's still a lot, but because Texas is so big, right? So that, it's still a lot of space. However, compare that to Nevada, where 85% of Nevada is public land, or New Mexico, where a third of New Mexico is public land. It's a much, much smaller percentage. Now, there is actually some BLM land in Texas. There's the Crossbar area, which is kind of by Amarillo. That is BLM land. There's, a couple of national parks in Texas. There's also some national forests, national grassland areas, but it's infinitesimal on a percentage basis compared to other states. Now that 5% that's owned, that's public land, I think it's like a little less than 2% of that is federal, and then the rest of it, I guess, is state. Or actually maybe also, county parks, city parks. I mean, there's all kinds of governments that can own land, but it's a very, very tiny percentage of that entire state. Now, there are places that allow dispersed camping. So there are some of the places that I was just talking about that allow dispersed camping. There are parks that allow dispersed camping, but it is very different than if you're traveling in New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah. I mean, those places have, and then, Eastern California. I mean, those places have so much dispersed camping, where it's much more difficult to find in Texas because most of that land is owned privately. And you don't want to just show up on someone's private land in Texas and start setting up your campsite because it's Texas, okay? You want to be careful there. So again, this is Elizabeth Off Grid. If you have any tips about finding good places to do dispersed camping in Texas, feel free to leave that in a comment below to share with everyone, or just stop by and say hi. I will talk to y'all next time. Bye-bye.